Marcus Aurelius, you're gonna love this one. We've started working with this company, School of Motion, to help them make some cool content for their students. We're working on a couple of spots that remind people to quit procrastinating and to do their homework. The concept is cute. It's a take on the classic devil versus angel gag, and there's already an edit with temporary VFX in place. Your job, if you choose to accept it, and why wouldn't you, is to really dial in the comp and to plus the spot any way you see fit. You know, have some fun with it.
Okay, let's take a look at the client edit.
Hungry? How about some fruit and some cut-up carrots? Or you could have a pizza. A nice slice of Hawaiian pizza with extra jalapenos.
Ooh, that sounds pretty good. I think I'm gonna order a pizza.
No! You know pizza makes you sleepy and you won't be able to do your School of Motion homework. He's right. Fruit it is. Fruit it is!
I gotta say, I love a good morality tale. It's clear that every expense was spared on this production, so I'm gonna pull the Premiere edit into After Effects and evaluate, but as far as I can tell, what we have here are some fairly inexpensive, read cheap elements, some spark hits, and the main job is gonna be getting the green screen keys working so that the magic of everything that's really funny about this can just not be distracted by crappy technical stuff.
Nice. So what we have here is two layers, one for the angel, one for the devil, some spark hits over this back plate, and so most of the work on this is going to be green screen keying. So let's get into it. Now, of course, when you import the Premiere project, it looks like this in After Effects. And I hope you don't mind, but I went ahead and organized this without making you watch me do it. So I've locked off and grayed out the layers that we're not going to be adjusting. Those are the spark hits that were at the top, the plate, background, which is guy on the couch, and the audio, which I've also gone ahead and disabled, so we're not listening to it as we work. And I'm going to start with this shot. So I've made all the devil shots red and the angel shots blue to start with. Now, one decision would be whether to split this up into individual shots. And normally I might do that. But in this case, I'm going to try working, at least to begin with, from this main comp here.
Right off the bat, I want to share with you a couple of techniques that will either get you rehired or make you grateful to yourself for doing such a good job. And that is to keep your project organized and also to make some decisions at the top about how you organize it. So imagine that any project you create is going to be handed off to somebody else who has to come to it cold. And how are they going to feel when they get it? Are they going to be elated because they can clearly understand everything you did? Or are they going to be confused and annoyed that they cannot tell actually what the hell you're even doing in this comp? You can kind of learn some things about somebody's personality when you look at their comps. The other person who can benefit from this is yourself, because it does come up that you have to go back to a project weeks or even months later. And if you've done a good job of organizing it, then you yourself can better understand it. This is even the case sometimes when you haven't even had your coffee in the morning and you're trying to figure out what's going on. It'll help you every stage of the way, I guarantee it. And people will rehire you for that and just generally for good communication skills.
Before I start, I'm going to make an adjustment to my workspace. I'll move the project panel, which I don't really need, but I do need the effect controls that double up with it. I'll just move them down here next to the timeline. Now, the reason for this is twofold. One, I'm not really animating much in this project, so I don't need the timeline to take up as much real estate. But also, there's a specific setup I'm going to use here to do my keying, and that is going to be to open up a layer panel and have it side by side with the comp panel, and I'll show you why in a moment. So this is actually my keying setup, and I'm even going to go ahead and save a workspace. What shall I call it? How about keying? Okay, so now I'll look for the most difficult frame, the one that seems to pose the most challenge in this clip. I'm mostly noticing the motion blur in the pitchfork there. So let's just find one with some, oh, look at that. He kind of spins it right there at the beginning. All right, we'll go with that.
Now, the reason that I'm starting with what looks like the most difficult frame in terms of motion blur and so on is edges are the name of the game. And so we're going to see things going on in the core maybe or other areas, but all you really care about, and the whole reason we've got this green screen behind them, is that we can get delicate, refined edges. Otherwise, we could use much cruder methods to cut them out. And we will use cruder methods where those are appropriate.
All right, so we got key light applied to the layer. We have my customized setup ready to go. And I'm going to show you the 5 things that I adjust in key light. And ideally, it's only 5. To start, and this isn't one of the things, I'm going to go to status in my view menu. That will turn the comp view to white. And then over here in the layer, I actually turned off render for the view of this effect. That's important, otherwise they're both white. But if I turn off render, I can see my original source image here and status over here, which isn't telling me anything yet. Now I'm going to select the eyedropper where it says screen color with a U because this tool's from London, and go over here to the layer view. Now I'm not going to click yet. I will hold down my option key and just start waving this around. And what I'm looking for are the areas where I get a good solid black in the background. It actually looked like right when I was starting, I was getting something really good. And I can go anywhere in the background. I'm just evaluating how to do it. And this lets me do that in real time. So it's a clever little trick, basically. Let's start where I was in the beginning. I think actually right at the very start I had the best spot, so let's see if I can figure out where that was. So what often works is to move the eyedropper to the area of frame where you're seeing the most gray. So that's what I did here. And when I click that, now I have actually set my background color. That's the most important adjustment you can make in key light. And so that's why we took this extra care to do it. Now, still in status view, there's one other adjustment I might make in these top controls up here, and that is to the screen balance. So there are only 3 settings that you might use for screen balance. 50 is the default. You could also use 5, or you could use 95. Now I know this is a little odd, but the way this works is at 50, it's weighing green equally against red and blue. At 5, it's closer to red or blue. We don't know which. And at 95, it's closer to the other one. Now, why don't they make this clearer? Well, I think it's because the choice of background color is a little bit arbitrary, and so it's going to change depending on what background color you actually chose. Or maybe they just never felt like updating this piece of UI. But 5 is close to 0, but not entirely 0, so you're not entirely shifting it away from the other color. And 95, same thing on the other end of the scale. The reason that I stuck with 5 here is my foreground is now whiter than it was at 50. And so basically I'm further ahead of the game here. Let's just go back again. So 50, there was more transparent background, but I don't like what's happening with his face. And I don't think the background's going to be a problem. So I'll go with that. And then I'll go to my third adjustment that I always make in key light, which is to go to intermediate result. And in almost every case, I'm going to leave it there.
I wouldn't call the way that I advocate working with key light unorthodox. I think the word that I would use is minimalist. So I've reduced the tools that I use in key light, and I've used all of them at one time or another, down to the ones that I feel key light is best at, the things that I think are going to get you the best key without complicating things. Now, most controversially, I don't use the final result view. And therefore, there are a bunch of tools in the controls that don't actually work, so I don't use them either. And I just focus on getting a good matte color choice, getting the most out of it that I can, and then doing the least possible to refine that. And then further refinement, I rely actually on other tools for that are specialized just for that purpose. Key light tries to offer you everything you need in one place, and in my case, it's not my go-to for anything but what it's really good at, which is just fundamentally extracting out that key color.
Believe it or not, we're already almost done with this key. I'll turn off the background because I'm not matching right now. And I can even switch with option 4 to the alpha channel. See how that's looking. It looks pretty good. I'll go back to status for a moment. And you can see that there is some spill on his staff or wand or whatever you want to call that. And it's probably more of an issue out here. Yeah, you can see there. Let's just take a look at intermediate on that frame. So again, you're always looking for the most difficult frame when you're doing this kind of adjustment. I'll go back to status for a moment, and I'm going to twirl down the screen matte controls. And this brings me to the final 2 controls that I would optionally adjust. I might only use one of them. Let's see. Clip black is basically raising the threshold at which we're getting rid of the pixels that we want to be transparent. Now I only raised that to 5. That's a teeny adjustment, and it's pretty much wiped out all those background pixels. So this is on a scale of 0 to 100. And the game is to keep clip black and clip white as far apart from each other as you can while getting the key that you want. Let's just see what happens. Okay, clip white, similarly, I didn't have to go very far, and boom, that interior reflection was gone. Now let's take a close look at this edge over here. We'll do it in status view, and then we'll do it in intermediate view. So as I come down to about 80, which is still not a huge crunch, you can see the edge is changing. You can also see these green pixels creeping in. You don't really have to worry about that. So those are showing me that if I did use final result, those are the ones that would be color corrected from green. However, as I've said, I don't like Keylight's color correction, so I'm not going to use it. Let's just take a look at intermediate result. And that is really kind of not bad in terms of a frame with a lot of motion blur. You can see that there appears to certainly be some spill, but you just need to be confident right now that we're going to take care of that. Okay, we're going to take a brief detour here and talk about status view and some of the other views in the Keylight effect. Here is status with no adjustments made. And you can see that everything's super, what we call bitmapped. Every pixel has no thresholding. It just has actually one of 3 values. The black ones show you what is transparent, or in RGB 8-bit terms, 0. The white ones are opaque, or 255 in 8-bit RGB land. And then the gray ones are somewhere between 1 and 254, and we don't really know where they are. We just know there's some transparency. So this is a very quick and handy way to take a look at the matte and say, well, there's definitely some background filling in back here. There's some holes in the staff, or it's looking a little shaky. So I'm going to want to firm that up. Now that I zoomed out, you can also see a thing that I added here. So I pre-comped the layer and put a mask around it. And the red is just showing me where there's already an alpha channel. So this is just a mask that I created in a pre-comp. And all the red is telling me is Keylight's not going to do anything with that because it's already transparent. So you may see that one come up. Now, the views that I recommend you use are basically 3. So combined matte is where you can look at the matte as it is currently. It's the same as going into, say, intermediate result and switching to the alpha channel view, which you can also do from this menu here. But I tend to use the shortcut, and you'll see me do that. So why would I do it with combined matte view? Well, if I'm in the middle of a whole stack of layers and I want to turn them all off just so I can solo this one and see if there's anything up with the matte, that gives me a way to do it. Status view, we've already seen. There's one other thing I'm going to show you here. As I start to adjust the matte, you may see green show up. And notice the green is not here. It's sort of an overlay threshold. That is showing me the areas of the image that are going to be changed if you go to final result. I recommend you not use final result. This isn't the only time you'll hear me say it, but I'm going to show you a little bit why that is. So final result right now is killing some of the green spill, but not really. There's still quite a bit left, right? And then intermediate lacks those black lines that it's been introducing. And also, you may even see in final result, there's more noise in even the foreground areas. So all the pixels that are getting keyed are also getting changed. And that can lead to side effects that you don't actually want. Therefore, you're only really going to ever see me use these 3 views. Now, what about all these others up here? Well, these correspond to some features in Keylight that I don't really recommend. So inside and outside mask, the color correction edges that correspond to edge color correction down here. These are all controls that you're not really going to see me delve into. I appreciate that Keylight provided them, but there are better ways to go about it, and that's what we're going to focus on. So now you're going to see me switch back to the comp as it was, and this was just our detour.
So generally speaking, when you get one frame that's the most difficult frame working well, that will translate well across most of the rest of the shot. So having refined the one frame, I'm now going to take a look at the shot in motion and see if that's the case.
I'll set a work area just around this one layer using Command Option B and press 0. Now, to the naked eye, it looks great. And additionally, I'm still free to switch to status view, where I do see some additional spill, but it's hard to tell if that's really an issue. So let's actually go to the alpha channel, screen matte. Now I don't really see any holes in this matte. And even if I did, I wouldn't necessarily be trying to take care of them here. But this is a remarkably good looking matte right now. Having done that, I'll switch back to intermediate result. And let's just take a close look at the edges here. I'll set the alpha channel, and what we want to see in the edges, even along a smooth edge like this, is a certain amount of thresholding. So that's these little gray pixels along here that are feathering that matte. Now let's just see what the adjustments we've already made have done. And I wouldn't do this every time, but this is just to show you kind of what we're doing here. So I'll set clip white back to 100 from 80, and let's just undo and redo that. So there's a bit more thresholding at 100 than 80, but not really anything that we worry about. And so in this case, let's just take a look at the area that has motion blur on it. Go back to that frame. So 80 looks like what we were after. I would call this a good matte, and now move on. Even with a matte as good as this, there are tools to make it even better. So one we're going to take a look at right now is not one that I always use, but Key Cleaner is a remarkably good tool for dealing with mattes. And you can see it's making a pretty pronounced difference there. Let's just take a look here. What it's going to do with motion blur is take away that kind of graininess that you see in the matte. So where things look a little chunky there, just kind of smooths stuff out. Along the edges, and again, I'm at the default setting, so I'm seeing some artifacts here I don't like. But let's go back to color. Just take a look. So with it on versus off, I'm losing that slight amount of matte line that's going there. Now, it's really subtle and probably would not come up unless I were matting him against a white background. I would say that Key Cleaner is actually too strong here, and I'm going to take it right down to about, let's say, 2 from the default of 10. I'm still getting the benefit here. If you look at the alpha, there's actually more thresholding now than there was, right? And it's cutting in slightly on his edge, but just about the right amount. So we're getting a nice amount of softness and thresholding and removal of that matte line. And then if we go back over here and look at the motion blur area, that is looking really good. So all of that graininess is reduced right down again before and after without spreading things out so much. Now, as a reminder, you're free to look at your matted image against the checkerboard or against the comp background color. By default, that might be black, but actually it's going to be whatever you last set it to. So if you want to set it to, say, gray, you You could do that. Or you could set it to the contrast of green, say yellow. Or you could set it to something that's a lot like what your background's going to be. In this case, I'm actually fine with black and the checkerboard, and eventually I will be bringing the background back to look at it against that. But I'm seeing kind of the same thing whichever one I look at, which is just some spill, particularly around this pitchfork edge. So for spill, there's another really great automated tool, and that is Advanced Spill Suppressor. It's pretty sophisticated. It has two settings, standard and ultra. And standard actually seems to be doing a better job with the pitchfork problem. Let's look at the overall figure. And it's not changing a whole lot. You definitely always want to watch skin tones and so on. But I think I like standard for what it's doing to that pitchfork. Now, I'm still seeing something in those edges. So there's a couple ways to handle that. First of all, to get an idea what exactly Spill Suppressor is doing, I can apply it just to the image without the matte. And so you see there, all the green in the background is going away. So at standard, I don't have the option to adjust all these individual things. If I switch to ultra, then I could do things like increase the tolerance or the desaturation, which push that hard will just make the whole image go black and white.
So again, you see that my less is more approach to keying extends beyond key light to the spill suppressor tool, where sometimes just the default setting is going to work, or at most maybe I switch it to ultra, but I don't feel obligated to then go in and adjust things unless I see something specific that it looks like I should adjust. Usually that's going to be enough.
So now I'll review our shot at full res in full motion. And that key is looking pretty darn good for a first pass. So I think this can be the basis for what we're going to do with the rest of the shot. Additionally, I noticed that there are a couple of shots that seem to be from the same basic setup. Now, you always have to be careful when you assume that what you did on one keyed shot is going to completely work for the others. It's actually more rarely the case than you might think, but there's nothing wrong with taking the entire set of effects here and just applying them to these other shots and previewing those just to see what happens. So we'll start with this one. And mind you, the more careful previewing that we did before is probably more suitable than jumping straight in to just looking at it over the background. So I see a little bit more matte lines happening here. Let's also go back and switch in key light to status. Occasionally you'll see some little booger like this in status view, but when it's that small and that faint, you probably don't need to worry about it. Just keep it in mind. Or we could garbage matte it. And the combined matte, or you could look at it instead as the screen matte. Those are the same thing in this case because we didn't add to the screen matte. Well, I don't see any holes, so that's great. And overall, everything I see with the edges is the same as I saw on the other shot. So again, I'm going to call this a good starting point. Let's just see, there's something catching my eye down here. Just zooming in to this little gap. Nope, it's just a gap. Sometimes, especially when you use automated edge tools, you'll see those fill in and you got to be careful because you get a little pop. But that does not seem to be happening. So that's good. And then this shot, I'm even more confident about because it's a simpler one. Again, bright edges over here. We'll see later on if that's an issue. Okay, good. I'll additionally, just to remind myself, rename these layers. I'll call each of them MCU. The reason I'm doing this is I could also use color to organize them, but it's to remind myself which shots are sharing the same effects. Now, there are other ways to share effects, of course. We could make one kind of the master, and as we adjust that, have the others tied to it via expressions, so instance it. I don't think I want to do that in this case. So from here on out, I will probably be making any adjustments manually unless it looks like I really made an overall misjudgment with the mask. And if so, I'll just be copying and pasting again. So now I'll save. Actually, I think I'll even version up. And we're ready to move forward now with the angel.
You might think that with two characters in the exact same position, under the exact same lighting, in the exact same environment, you could just copy and paste your key light setting. I have rarely ever found that to be the case, and it's not even an approach I try to take. I barely even take that approach when I just have a sequence of the same character who was just parked in the same spot. I don't know what it is, but things sometimes will just change, and rather than be surprised by that, it doesn't take very long to just start over. The other thing is, in a case like that, you may find one key is working better, and it might be appropriate then to copy that one over and see if it works better on one of the other ones. So all that as a long-winded way of saying it's quicker to just kind of start from scratch each time.
So now, corresponding to those devil shots, we have a couple of angel medium close-ups, or actually a medium shot. I said MCU, these are really medium shots, whatever. Okay, so for this one, to get started, I'm going to go with the longer one. And I think I want a garbage matte around him for two reasons. One, there's a boom in the shot, but also there's huge areas of frame over here that look darker and which don't in any way impact the edges of the shot. So I can keep this really simple. Watch that wing there on the right. I can even do just a dumb square mask, almost. Add a point here and bring that one down. And I could do the same on this side as well. And let's open that up, and actually I turn render on here and see if we're good. Close. We don't need to be so stingy here. We can give it a little extra room. And remember, you can always curve out a mask, just pull out some Beziers. All right. Give a little more room to the halo there. Great. I've done that. Back to the effect controls, and we start over again with key light. Status, render off, screen color, wave it around. I'm just focusing on just the areas inside that mask I already drew. Looks like up here. Ooh, yeah, there was a good one right there. Great. Screen balance. That's at 5. That's probably it. Yep, we'll go with 5. And now, under screen matte, black, solidify that background. That went up to 12. So my rule of thumb is anything up to 15 or even 20 is okay for clip black. And for clip white, anything down to, depends. You kind of want to focus on the delta between the two of them. So right now, 88 minus 12 is 76. That's a decent delta. If I went lower on clip black, I would feel more comfortable lowering clip white further. But here's the thing. Right now, I would push harder on clip white to get rid of any holes in the center of the matte. But there's a whole different way, if you excuse that pun, to actually do that. So watch what happens to the edges if I come down on clip white. And I'm in status view, but you can see that they're creeping outward. And if you want to see it more dramatically, let's go to intermediate result and watch what happens to the edges as I work here. I'll turn off the background. Let's look at the alpha channel. Now you can really see all that nice subtlety in the edges goes away as soon as I come down even a little bit. Here's what I notice. The problems with this matte are not near the edges. Some of them are somewhat close, but those are pretty minuscule issues. And rather than solve them right here, where I know it's going to impact the edges negatively, my call is I'm going to leave clip white where it is and keep that in my back pocket that I could come down on that later. And this does seem like a great opportunity for Key Cleaner to show us what it can do. Okay, I'm not so crazy about that right there. Let's see what happens if we change the edge radius. Now, I said I'm not crazy about that, but in fact, I went straight to the thing that I could easily solve, because it's nowhere near those edges. Let's look at the edges again and what Key Cleaner is doing to them. There's a minuscule loss of detail, barely any. You can still see his eyelash. But more to the point, the problem that I saw over here is going away. Now I could come down even more. Say to 1, still doing the job. And we'll solve this separately. The third of our powerful tools is Spill Suppressor. And that's going to be important here because our talent is wearing white. Now at the standard level, I noticed things go a little pink. Let's try the Ultra method. And I'm really liking what that's doing with the white balance. Wow. So other than this issue here, I am ready to preview this and see if there are any other issues. If you're not sure if there's a spill problem, there is a way you can test that out. Under color correction, hue and saturation lets me pick different channels. Now you'd think I would go with greens, but the way to test if you got the right range is to raise the saturation. And you should see those pixels pop if you got the right one. Undo that, and let's go to cyans. Nothing happening there. So my guess is the yellows. Yep. Now yellows, of course, occur all over the place, including the skin tones. So with it at 100%, let me see if I can adjust the range so that it's just in the blur areas. And I may not be able to do it. Yeah, that's kind of difficult. But we could subtly pick this thresholding here. Now, once I've found the range, I don't want to oversaturate. So I'll come back down to 0. And now I have a choice. Do I want to go further with desaturating? Like that. It's helpful to look over the background for this. So, saturated, that's not. That does seem to be helping. However, let's look at his skin tones on his face. Okay, I'm actually liking that approach pretty well in this case. The other options would be to change the hue, so we could push it more toward red. That also is working okay. Generally, I like that one better than desaturating, just because desaturating is not so natural. There was some tone there. And of course, there would be cases where you might want to darken them down, but this is not one of them.
When footage is being well shot, I'm a big proponent of things like shallow depth of field, motion blur, all this kind of stuff that actually is really fun to key and will really help sell the shot. I was supervising on commercial a few months ago, and they were asking me, is that a problem if we have the talent out of focus in the foreground against, I think we were using a blue screen because it was at nighttime, and blue screens are better at night because they don't pop with this crazy radioactive green. So I said, hell yeah, yes, let's go with shallow depth of field. Put the talent in the foreground with a blurry edge and lots of detail. I'm looking forward to pulling that out of there, even though that was actually somebody else's job.
Before I move on with solving this matte, there's a technical thing that's bugging me that I want to solve, and that's the frame numbering on the red footage. I don't know if you noticed this, but there are 7-digit frame numbers in here. With the clip selected in the project panel, I choose Interpret Footage, Override Start Timecode, and I'll type in 0 or 1. I'm fine with 0. That's consistent with the way After Effects tends to default. Having done that, I can right-click and under Interpret Footage, choose Remember Interpretation. Then if I select all of the red clips, right-click again and choose Apply Interpretation. Now they all start at frame 0. So now we're safe to do the painful next step, painful to some, which is to pre-comp. That's going to be the simplest way to close up the holes in the core of the mat. Now, when you pre-comp, you either send all the properties to the new comp or keep them where they are. Or there's a script that lets you do a mixture. I'm going to do that by hand. I'll just take the mask and the key light effect out of here. That looks kind of cool actually, but let's not pre-comp it. I will choose to leave attributes here. I'll rename it. And now, paste those. There are my holes. I'm going to call this one edge mat and duplicate it. I like the core to sit below the edge. So this one's going to be called core mat, or I can call it C mat. I also use G mat to refer to a garbage mat when I'm doing something like this outside mask as a separate layer. And now I am going to choke this mat a little bit. Now you can see the holes are already looking a lot better. The only problem now is that I kind of messed up my edges, and so I've got to choke the mat inward to get it away from doing that. So the simplest way to do that is actually not in the key light effect, because that introduces some weird artifacts. But with a separate tool called Simple Choker, that's all it does, and I can just adjust it upward. The only thing I'm noticing though is the holes seem to be reappearing when I do that. So let's turn off the edge mat and just see what's going on. Okay, so initially the mat being choked is actually choking it away from the holes, therefore making them bigger. So I need to go the opposite direction first. If I go in a negative direction, they are closed. So that's about, let's just call it -1, and I will call this spread because that's what that's doing. Then I'll apply the Simple Choker again and call this one choke. And this is all in the core mat, mind you. Now I'm going to have to choke this quite a bit to get it away from the edges. Let's look at both so I can see what's happening. If I toggle it, I can see here in the edges, in order to get it not to affect those, I'm going to have to choke it quite a bit, which is okay because the problems that I'm solving are well inside of that. And because it looks a little weird like this, I'll go all the way up to 40. That's an indication that your mat could also end up looking weird like that. So there's one more thing we want to do, which is to blur out that core mat. So with a channel blur, I can blur the alpha. Let's say not too much, maybe like 10. And now you can see that it's basically not affecting the fur very much, and I think it's going to look good. Back in the assemble, I can change this color to be blue again, or I can make it different since it's a pre-comp now. How about aqua? Let's turn on the background and just preview that. Well, that is a damn fine looking mat, even without having it fully loop up the preview. In fact, that makes it easier to appreciate everything that's happening in the motion blur, that hand and all the detail and that halo and the wings. So this mat, I would say, is a winner. Now the question is, do we apply the exact same settings to the other matching shot? We can test that out. We've made it a little more complicated now, but I can take the same key light effect, start with that. Oh, and actually I need that mask as well, so I should have grabbed that. And then let's try applying those to start with. The garbage mat's going to have to be a little different. I want the background off so I can see the alpha. It looks like similar but not identical issues going on with this mat, so hard to tell if that's the right key light setting just yet. I'm going to recommend rekeying this because it doesn't look identical to me. And when in doubt, don't live with the wrong thing. It's too simple to just do this whole process over again. Let's see how quickly we can do it.
So now you've seen that not only animators will sit there and go back and forth between frames to get something just right. However, we are actually about halfway through this sequence, and so now we're going to move on to the, I guess I'll call it the 3-shot of our full-size talent and his angel and devil.
So let's start with this one, where they are the most prominent. The approach is going to be really similar to what you've already learned, with one major addition, which is that in addition to doing a garbage, edge, and core pass, there are also cases where you need to further break apart the matte to different areas of the frame. And so this angel seems like an obvious case where that's going to be necessary, because as you can see, we've got a lot of variety of colors going on in this background, from the very dark podium to this very light floor. And we've also got some extra translucency happening, which we may or may not want to keep. I'm thinking we do not in the gown. The starting point is going to be the same, and that's going to be to just try a first pass with key light. Now, in a case like this, the selection of background color is a little more crucial. And notice I can choose the colors up here, some of which might get most of the upper body, but none of which are getting what's happening down below. And then I could choose one of these colors on the floor, for example, that one, and get almost all the background. Now, why wouldn't I do that? Take a look at this edge, and I will continue to move my color selector around. So for comparison, I'll find a different edge color somewhere here in the middle. Doesn't need to be perfect, that's fine. And undo and redo. Now, forget about this noise, we could do better than that, but just look at the edge. Undo, redo. So selecting such an aggressive color is really going to mess with my edge. I can tell you right now, and if you couldn't tell, you would find out soon enough, there is no selection that's going to take care of his whole body. We don't want to do it that way. So instead, we want something that gets most of the top, waist, or a little bit lower up. I think I could do a little better than that. And then I'm just going to work on that part and not worry about this lower part. Screen balance of 5 looks good. I'll make my gentle adjustments to clip black and clip white. Take a look at the matte. So that's a really nice matte up here on top if we don't worry about what's happening down there.
I've hinted at this already, but now I'm just going to come out and say that the #1 mistake that is made with color keying is to expect it to be a one button or one effect process. You've already seen us break down the key into garbage matte, core matte, and edge matte. And now we're going to break it down the other way, which is by area of the foreground. These are both very common things to have to do. And there's no reason to be disappointed about that, because recognizing it and moving forward is going to make it happen much more effectively and quickly than if you still tried to kind of shoehorn everything into one key.
So since we know we need to chop this one up a bit, it is time to bite the bullet and pre-comp. I'll move everything into the new composition, and I'm going to try a slightly different approach this time. So I'll duplicate the layer which has my mask and key light, but on the top layer I'm going to get rid of key light, and on the bottom layer I'm going to get rid of the mask. Then on that top one I'll show my blending modes, they were already showing, and choose stencil alpha. So on the lower layer I'm going to go back to intermediate result, and what's happening is that garbage matte is now on a layer that is using stencil alpha mode to basically drill down through all the other layers below it and apply it. Now the reason I'm doing this is because my holdout areas and garbage mattes are going to be a little more complicated this time. And so that just gets that out of the way. I'll call it G matte. This one will be edge. And now Let's also duplicate that to make a core, which could be above or below. I'll just make it below because that's my habit. And let me show you a slightly different way to handle the core mat as well. Now, when I solo the layer, the garbage mat goes away, so perhaps that's a disadvantage, but I'm not going to worry about that. Going back to status view, I'm now going to crush this mat a bit. And so in the screen mat controls, I will lower clip white down to a level where it really would be ruining my edges, but I've filled in the holes. And now I'm going to go even further and set the clip black, not by adjusting it one sort of number at a time, but actually typing in the number just below the one I set for clip white. So clip white is at 65 and clip black is at 64. So guess what? I now have a really, really ugly mat with effectively no thresholding. What I just did was already choke it a bit by setting clip black so high. And so now I'll just choke it a little bit more using the simple choker, just to the point where I know it's clear of my edges. Now let's take a look at what we've got. There's a bit of noise in the background. So there are two things I could do about that. One would be a better garbage mat, and the other would be just a slightly higher setting on the clip black of my edge mat. So let's do both. The garbage mat now is going to change because I'm not trying to do any of this down here in this pass. So I'll take these points and just delete them and cut this off kind of up here. And then I'll just come in a bit. And let's just make sure that that's still a good mat. I'm seeing some flickering over here and down here. So in fact, that core setting wasn't quite right. Come down a little bit more on clip white and fill those in. And having done that, let's make sure my edges are good. Those are still good. And now on the edge, I just want to make sure I quiet down that background a little bit more by raising clip black just a bit more. That's pretty good. And the other option is to add key cleaner. And at a very low setting of like 1 for the edge radius, that background is going to look clean other than this one speck here. So let's just garbage mat that out as well. Good enough.
Visual effects is magic, and I mean that pretty literally. Just like a magician, what we're doing is technical and maybe secret, but also it involves the process of misdirection. So nobody's looking at the feet or the bottom of the gown. Everyone's looking at the delightful wings and the expression on the face and the halo above, and we nailed those. So all we have to do is not call anyone's attention to the part of the shot where their attention doesn't belong in the first place.
Now to the lower portion. By duplicating this GMAT, turning off stencil alpha back to normal, and renaming this lower, delete the mask, make myself a new one, and I'm going to try to make this decently good garbage mat for down here. Now, what is a decently good garbage mat? Well, we'll find out after I give it my first pass and then we put it into motion. Okay, we'll start with that. You can just solo it, and let's see what happens if we apply key light just to this part. I'm not gonna be so picky about my edges down here. Let's see what happens if I go aggressive. Not bad. Let's see what we can do with the core mat. You can close most of those holes and then just choke it in. Now, it's worth remembering that this thing is going to be scaled down in the final. So things that pop, like all this chatter, will not work. But slightly firmer edges in this gown, probably not a problem.
There are a couple of different things going on here with the shoes and the gown. The shoes are reflecting light. That is green spill on the shoes, and that definitely does not help us in any way. When I first looked at the shot, though, I noticed that the gown is translucent, and so there's more green coming in where it doesn't overlap with itself. And I thought about maybe trying to preserve some of that. However, then I noticed that the pillar holding up the talent is right in the middle of it. So if I preserve it, I'm just going to make it clear that there's this object there and kind of spoil the illusion. And honestly, this is not really about gown transparency. If we had, say, a bride on the green screen and she had flowing veils and things, then we would definitely have to worry about that. That would be something we'd be preserving, or some crazy sci-fi costume with like a dome glass helmet or what have you. I don't know where I'm getting these examples, probably because I've had to do them. But in any case, we're going to make both of these solid.
To try and improve things a little bit, I'll apply key cleaner. You can see that soften things quite a bit. There's still holes. I'll come back on that edge radius a bit, and let's just take a look at the whole thing, or at least the whole lower thing. Now I'm sure you're looking at these holes in the mat, the bottom edge of the gown, and all the noise in the shoes. And none of those look very good even with a scaled down element. The sides over here and most of the gown is actually looking pretty good, along with actually the ankles. So for the rest, rather than continuing to try to solve this with more and more brutal keys, I'm going to say it's time to punt and do some animated masking.
So if you find yourself having to do a bit of roto on your key, don't despair. Just think about how painful it would be to, say, roto out all those angel feathers if you didn't have a green screen. What we have to do here, honestly, is pretty minor and is going to save us a lot of trouble.
I'll duplicate out one more layer, and this will just be for roto. Get rid of the mask on that one. And speaking of masks, I have the same mask applied to 2 layers here, and I now want to change it. There's another way to have one mask applied to many layers, and that is with expressions. So I'll apply an expression to this lower mat or mask, pick whip to the upper one, and now make my changes up here to this one. And if I turn off that top layer, you'll see that the changes are now applied to both layers. Hooray! Now, this next part we can do at high speed because we've already covered it. By getting individual tracks for the gown and each of the shoes and linking more detailed masks to those tracks, I take advantage of the fact that these don't change their shape and get my roto for cheap. Now I know in MoGraph it's typical to work at half or quarter res. When you're evaluating edges like this, you really do need to bite the bullet and just look at them at full. If it's faster, you can knock out a render and review that way, but I tend to just take a little coffee break. Now, one thing you can see here is that I missed that there was a keyframe at the end, so I'm fighting a little bit with the fact that the mask is getting shrunk back down to the size I originally set it, which was missing those holes. It all works out in the end, but just look a little more closely than I did, maybe.
So there you have it. That's all it took. And now we have a mat that would be acceptable on any level of production, right up to feature film level, even though what we're trying to create here is supposed to look kind of cheap. Having achieved that, I'm going to raise my own degree of difficulty here and see if I can pull a key on the other element without even pre-comping.
In order to take the devil in one pass, I have removed the garbage mat from editorial, and we're going to garbage mat this baby in Mocha this time. I'm not going to track this garbage mat, but I am going to track masks of these shoes. And in fact, I'm going to be rather particular about those. And now I'll track those 2 feet. That looks great. Then over here, I'm going to apply the mat, and I'm also going to create masks, but I don't need that garbage mat, so I can delete layer 1 and just keep the feet. Now the key to making this work is a little unorthodox, but I don't want to now key out those feet. So the issue with the devil, his robe is opaque. So unlike with the angel, I'm going to have good success down here at the bottom where it's not as well lit. But the feet are the problem. Let me just show you what I mean. So we'll just choose any old color here. Okay, so if I just apply this as is, let's solo that layer so I can look at the alpha. And we got holes, big time, in those shoes because there's spill all over them. So get rid of that key light, and instead I'm going to use spill suppressor, but of course I don't want to use it on the whole thing, just on the feet. So although every shot is a special snowflake, we're using the same process as before on this one, with the goal of just keying out the area above the floor. It's a good looking mat, we just have to take care of the bottom part. And we're going to send key light back to intermediate result so that I still have the green. I don't think you can really see it, but those are green pixels. They are still the original pixels. So now I'll apply a key light again. I can rename this one key light lower. And let's see, this time if I go to status, it's a little weird, but we could do it this way. So that already looks pretty good. Let's see it in motion. Now the issue is that if I'd chosen that floor pixel for the rest of it, I would have lost some of the motion blur and so on. So we're pushing this mat harder. Notice that I do have a hole in this mat up here, but that's where I think I can now apply key cleaner and set it to a low level. Interesting. So one thing I've got to do is close that hole in the mat in this one layer. Other than that, this is a good mat, but hold on. That hole only opened up when I applied key light, the lower one. And what I didn't do is also attach that to my G mat. So let's try that. Aha. I'll just hide that mat. And boom, we've got a great looking mat without any pre-comping.
All right, having come up with an approach for each type of shot in this sequence, I've gone ahead and keyed and rotoed each one of them the same way we just looked at, along with applying spill suppressor and key cleaner. And now we're going to be ready to move on to phase 2 of the sequence, which is the actual compositing.
Here is the completed project as far as foreground keying goes. And I realize it superficially looks just the same I'll review it with you in a moment, but I have a couple of tips to share. One is how I duplicated what I was able to reuse. So pretty much everything besides Mocha transfers over. And on a single layer, that means copying all the other effects. But I first went ahead and did the Mocha work on each layer so that I would have the same masks to just apply to the layers that need them. And that all just lines up automatically. Now, I don't recommend copying Mocha, even though it's tempting because you've already drawn those masks. The issue is that Mocha has its own set of keyframes and those come along too. You could make yourself a Mocha template with all of your masks and copy and paste that into all of them and then animate it. And that could potentially save you some time. For the Angel pre-comps, pretty much the same deal, but with the addition that you can take everything but that top layer where Mocha is applied and just swap in the new source. Now, if you don't know how to do that, you go into the project and choose your footage, and then I hold down Command and Option and /, and that just swaps in that new footage, and of course the length changed. So because there are no keyframes on these layers, that works perfectly well. Now let's just take a look at what we've got. So the sparks are going to stay as they are, but we do need to integrate the angel and devil with a little bit of movie magic. And that's what we're going to be doing next. So any issues that I still see with bright spots around the mat and so on, I'm waiting to take care of those until I integrate these guys further. So let's get to it.
All right, we've pulled some really excellent keys using some really amazing tools, and now our work is not done. In fact, we haven't started compositing yet. Compositing is matching, so let's get into it.
I almost forgot. There's one error that I corrected, and I'm going to go ahead and correct it in what I did before now. So when I pre-comped the angel, I moved everything into the new composition. But that included position and scale. So here in the master comp, those are at the default, but the layers in the pre-comp are all scaled and repositioned. And that's not really what I want. They all have the same number, and it's not a big deal, but now I'm going to be animating them a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy those settings, and then I'll individually select each one. So I pressed P and then Shift S to expose them here. Whoops, gotta be careful when you do this. I'm holding down the Command key and individually selecting each one. And then I'm gonna right click and say reset. And then over here, I will just paste in the repo. And that's how these other ones were already set up. So now everything is standardized, and I'll just save that. So integration means more than blending modes and layers and edges and color and grain and all that stuff. The first gag I want to add to integrate these guys is just have them wobble around more. Like you can see some movement of the feet, but the figures themselves aren't really moving. This is an obvious call for a wiggle, but there's a specific way I want to set that up. So the wiggle is going to be to position. And I'm also going to expose scale, because one thing I want to do is create one expression that I can use for all the layers. And if I change my mind about how much or how often they're wiggling, I want to be able to just control that from one place. For that, I'll create an adjustment layer, call it controls, and I can send it all the way to the bottom. And in the controls effects, I will add couple of sliders, and I'll lock it so it stays up there. And we're just going to call these freak, like me, and amp. All right, so that would be the same as the arguments in wiggle. So in here, I'll type nothing, because actually what I'm going to do is now link these. So frequency, I will link right to that slider. And let's give it a default value. Let's say the default frequency is once every couple seconds, so 0.5. 0.5 wiggles per second, so 1 every 2 seconds. Then, and I'm doing it this way because I know this expression already, so I know what to type, a comma. And now I'm going to pick whip to scale, and then I'll multiply it by the amp. Let's call that also 0.5 for right now. So half of the scale, i.e. 30 pixels, will be the amount, right? Because 70 scale, 70 divided by 0.5 is going to be, well, 35. And then, yeah, okay. So let's see how that looks. Oh, and let's actually copy just the expressions so that we don't reposition the devil, and see them both in action, like so. Yeah, kind of subtle, but I like it. I can say that if we wanted to change the amplitude to really see it, we could. Likewise, if we wanted a higher frequency, we could do that. I don't know, what do you guys think? It was probably pretty good the way it was. So whatever I decide is going to be proportional, or so is my hope. So having copied that expression, now what I can do is paste it to every one of these layers. So essentially I can select all of them, all the foreground layers. And I don't need to repaste it to these two, although there's no penalty, I don't think, for doing so. So now, there's one, okay, that's the one thing to worry about here, is there's a gap opening up, right? Because it can wiggle either direction. So for these close-up shots, there's something additional I need to do. So honestly, all I have to do here is just take the guy and slide him down, and the wiggle will just keep up with that. I can take a look at the value, and without the expression, I probably moved him down more than I needed to, actually. So let's say something like that, 40, maybe 50 pixels. Good to go.
All right, let's face it. Expressions are intimidating for the uninitiated, and we all start out uninitiated. I learned about them early because I chose to write about them in my very first book I ever worked on, and there was a period where I had no idea what was going on. In this course, I'm only calling out the ones that are really the most used and the most straightforward to use. Wiggle is one of those, and you saw me just option click on the stopwatch to set the expression, and then you saw the adjustments I made. So I encourage you to learn the ones I teach you here, and if you want to learn more about expressions, I believe there is at least one excellent course for you out there to do that.
Let's take a look at one where they're really small. So for example, this one, just make sure that part works. So you can see where the full close-up ones were wiggling by 10, 20, 30 pixels. This one is just imperceptibly moving. And there you have it.
All right, well, we braved expressions to get a bit of ambient animation happening. Pretty elegantly, I might add. And now we get to have a little fun and do a little look development on what's going to make these ethereal beings feel ethereal.
Let's make an angel glow in the simplest, most straightforward way possible. And that will be to duplicate the angel layer. Now, immediately you see a little problem here. And we're going to fix that by first finding the expression with EE on the keyboard, and then option clicking to get rid of the expression. And then to get them to line up and stay that way, I'll reveal parenting and hold down the Shift key to parent that layer above to the one below.
Whoa, hold on there. Did you catch that? Most people don't know this, but if you hold down the Shift key when invoking parenting, the child layer, the one you are invoking from, will take on the transform properties, the basic ones, position, rotation, and scale, of the parent, and just snaps into place. Dope.
So the basic way to do this is using add mode. That's obviously going to brighten things up a lot. And now we're going to get some control of that. So the way to make a bit of a glow around the angel, having added add, is going to be to just blur that out. Quite a bit, but obviously we've got to get this effect under control a bit. So one thing about add is it's plussing up all the saturation. So let's definitely get rid of that. The tint effect, that'll just make that monochrome. And then let's further get control of this with levels. And so for that, I want the matte itself to be high contrast. So I'm focusing on where the actual image data is right here. But then to control it, I'm going to use output white and bring that down. Now I notice the core and the area around the face is too hot. So I'll make a mask here and invert it to F to feather it out. That's starting to get kind of like what we want. And so now it's really up to you where you want to land with this. Let's do before and after. Yeah, something like that. If we want it to be softer, go back and blur it out a bit more. If we don't want it to be quite so hot, just come down further, the output white. And of course we can hide that mask so we don't have to look at it.
So at this point, I guess you could say the details are in the devil. Ha! All right. If you like dad jokes, you're going to appreciate the lesson later this week.
For the devil, we've got a few extra issues. First of all, if I duplicate him, I am reminded up here in the effect controls, which I've moved back up to the left corner and closed the layer panel because we don't need that anymore. We're not keying. So I've got all these effects in here, plus the scaling on him, and this is all pointing to the need to pre-comp to keep working on this. So I'll do that, but this is a case where I don't want everything to go into the pre-comp. So give this a name, and then in here I'll go in, and so I want him at full scale here, so, and in the center. So I'll just get scale and position with the S and P shortcuts and copy both of those. Oh, I also don't want the expression, so let me remove that. Then I'll take these, copy them, and also choose reset. Then I can close that. And in the main comp, I can make this red. It's very important. And then paste those in, and again, use the shift key to parent, and boom, we are back. So similar approach as before, adding the devil over himself. Remember, we've got that hot matte line, especially on the left edge. But again, I'm about to get a glow going around him. So similar situation as before. We don't really want to light up the face. We don't have a halo this time. So I'll just make kind of a mask like that and invert it, feather it out quite a bit. And now with that layer, we'll add a blur. And actually we want this glow to be quite red. So let's also throw in a hue saturation and actually colorize it to be fully saturated. And for red, I'm going to go to 10. This time we want kind of a flame effect going on. Let's just see what we've got so far. And I'll probably throw in, I'll get a levels effect in here again. And let's see, this time around, I think I'm okay with the contrast. I'm just gonna lower, kind of dull this down a little bit, but pop the gamma a little bit.
I could just put a red glow around the devil, but we all know the devil's got a little bit more going on than the angel, so I think we need some with a little more salsa.
I'll solo the layer. We'll just look at that over the checkerboard. And to get some flaminess happening, that will be a turbulent displace, which by default is this weird ghoulish thing going on. So to adjust, the size needs to be quite a bit smaller, and the complexity needs to go up. So about 1/5 the size and about 5 times the complexity. And now if I manipulate the evolution, you can see we've got a kind of flamey thing going on here. So we're going to want evolution to be happening over time. And to do that, what I usually like to do is use a time expression. So I option clicked on the effect, and now I'm going to say time. If I just use time, that's not enough. And for a slow burn, I might go with 100. But for this one, I want these smaller licking flames. So let's try 200, and we can see that in motion. Okay, that might be the right amount, but the other thing that we really need is for the flames to go upward, and that's going to be with an offset on the Y. So again, the way to do this is going to be with an expression using time. Now the reason to use time expressions is they don't end. So if I want to use these same expressions on various layers, which I will, I don't have to worry about keyframes. So we're going to set a couple variables. X should be 0 because we don't want movement left to right. Y will be time, and we'll multiply it again. And this time we'll use -100. And then the final line is just X comma Y for those two variables. Let's try it. That is the idea. So now let's unsolo the layer and see what we've got. Now let's talk about interactive lighting, specifically some glow on the face when this cheesy spark element hits. So for that, I'll add an adjustment layer. Now notice when I add that layer, their positions shifted. That's the result of how the wiggle effect works, and that's why we have to be careful with that effect. It randomizes off the layer number. If I move this down below those angel and devil layers, their positions are unaffected. Now, it is meant to be a random effect, so in one way, no big deal. But sometimes you get it exactly as you want it, and then you change it, and you didn't mean to. It's happened. So just be aware. Okay, having trimmed the layer below, I'll rename it Face Glow, and let's give it an orange layer color to remind us what it's doing. I think what I'm going to do is go down to the plate layer, and we can start at the end here, no big deal. And I'm going to make an oval. I can disable that mask so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'll kind of make it banana shaped so it's conforming to the edge of his face. Like that. And then track it backwards. So this is a good use of the mask tracker in After Effects, just to do what in color correction we'd call a power window. And let's stop it now because it's going too far. And I'll get rid of the keyframes that are outside of work area. And I think I can just cut this whole thing out, mask and path. Select the mask, cut, go here, paste. There it is. Okay. On an adjustment layer, if I make this an add mode, nothing happens yet, but if I add any effect, say a levels effect, all of a sudden the entire frame gets brighter, and I do want to actually now enable my mask. So within the mask now, what's happening is, even though I haven't made any changes to levels at all, just adding an adjustment layer with an add mode is adding that layer to itself. So that's more of a general tip for you to know about. Obviously, one thing I'm going to need here is some feathering. And actually, that was a good way to see how much I want. So before I get rid of that effect, let's just change that up. So instead, I'm going to steal the colorization that I had with my Devil Glow, that hue and saturation effect. And let's see, we'll go a little more orange this time, just a skosh. And I realize on one frame it's kind of imprecise, but what we're going to do is animate the opacity. So the peak opacity will actually be where the flash is at its hottest, say there. And even that is going to be pretty modest, like 45% top maybe. Set a keyframe. At the beginning we will be at 5. Go back and the end opacity can again be 5. And once the layer ends, it'll just disappear altogether. Nice. If it's still not subtle enough, we can dial back that opacity in the middle. But somewhere in there is going to do it.
All right, things are looking pretty good, but we do need to give it the once over and make sure we don't have anything we haven't dealt with yet that is going to stand out and ruin the shot by calling attention to itself.
One other thing before I build the rest of this out concerns this matte line, the white line over here. I had said that once the glow was happening, maybe it wouldn't matter, but it still doesn't look right to me. Luckily, it's a pretty trivial matter to solve this. I'll go back to the key light effect that was used to pull that main matte, and under screen shrink / grow, I'm going to go in a negative direction, but only slightly. So by holding down the command key, I can increment in 1/10 of a pixel increments, and right around 7 or 8, -7 or 8, I'm pretty satisfied that the matte line is basically dealt with. And there's an extra benefit. If you look at the pitchfork, it's also kind of losing its matte line. There's some other interactive lighting that's not bad, but I don't think that there's an actual loss of detail that is problematic anywhere, especially given the scale of the element. So if you do this, and if you ever need to further adjust it, you can also work with screen softness. So you can shrink the matte and then introduce back with a little bit of softness and find your happy place that way. But in this case, we don't even need to do that.
The rest of the work to be done here is iterative. It's taking what I've already done and sending it out to all layers. So rather than have you watch me do that, I'm just going to do it. And anything that comes up, I will share with you after it's done.
So this is where I got to with this entire sequence. If we look at just the timeline, you can see that there are glows above the irregular layers, and there are some interactive light in orange. And because of the tidy color usage, it's not bugging me too much that I haven't put these in pre-comps. One way to organize this differently would be to make each of these a shot, and another one would be to take all the glow layers and basically stick them in one overall layer. But I don't think you or I or anyone else is too bothered that it's organized like this. And one additional thing that I fixed that I'd like to share is just that I added a hue and saturation effect onto this pitchfork here. Now, I just wasn't liking the way it was getting kind of white around the edges. And we dealt with this a bit before. But what I did was go into yellow saturation and just pump it up. And then I applied this just with a mask that is right around the fork itself, which I tracked in Mocha. And I did this for each of the shots. If we preview it, there's this really nice thing happening with just the kind of glow, like it's kind of magical, right? Where it's getting hotter as he waves it around. So the same motion that was catching the light before is now just making it look extra hot. And I kind of like it. So I decided to go with it. It's kind of what you call a happy accident. And as much as we associate visual effects work with precision and knowing exactly what you're doing and so on, that's all a big lie. And in fact, happy accidents happen all the time, and you can make use of them just the same way as you do with what we would call motion graphics.
So guys, I didn't want to say anything about this, and I'm being super quiet so they don't hear me, but the whole time I've been giving you this lesson, there's been this angel over here telling me, keep showing them more. There are more things you could show them. You could make the shot better. And there's this devil going, finish the damn shot already. So let's see which one of them was right.
Hungry? How about some fruit and some cut up carrots? Or you could have a pizza. A nice slice of Hawaiian pizza with extra jalapenos.
Ooh, that sounds pretty good. I think I'm gonna order a pizza.
No! You know pizza makes you sleepy and you won't be able to do your School of Motion homework. He's right. Fruit it is. Fruit it is!
Well, believe it or not, what you learned here about keying will apply to 80 to 90% of the keying work you will ever see out there. Well, that was pretty bold, but I kind of think that's true. There's some weird shots out there though, and we're going to get into some in the next lesson. For now, keep in mind that we learned all about key light, which is one very excellent tool for keying. And we learned how to use only the features in key light that are really the ones you need, and to rely on other tools, for example, the color tools and the matte cleanup tools that we brought out there, to improve upon it. And then we also focused on how to break down a shot so that rather than trying to do the whole thing with one pass of key light, you can use multiple passes so that you get focus on what's really most important, which is that refined edge. Because remember, if it wasn't for retaining that edge, we'd never go to the trouble of setting up these green or blue screens behind our talent. All right, well, now, believe it or not, you're gonna get a chance in the exercise to have a crack at a scene rather similar to the one you've just seen.